Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming along to this Trees and Design Action Group TDAG seminar today. TDAG is a network and a forum that brings together people and organisations in the public and private sector to support the role of urban trees and to help with to improve collaboration in planning, design, construction, management and maintenance of our urban spaces. Evidence-based information is really important to us, and the presentations that we have today are really important to us, and all sorts of knowledge exchange is important. So if you can see a question that you can answer in the chat, please do. Please feel free to ask as many questions as you want. Today's seminar is on the theme of trees as critical urban infrastructure. And it's thinking about design because we are the Trees and Design Action Group. And so designing with trees and thinking about the below ground challenges is the focus of today's seminar. Just before we start, I would like to thank our knowledge sharing partners. Their role is to disseminate information, encourage their members to come along. And those partners for today are CIHT, so the Chartered Institution of Highways and Transportation, IHE, the Institute of Highways Engineers, the Landscape Institute, and the Urban Design Group. Now, enough of me. I would like to pass over to our chair today, who is Holger Kessler. He is the Senior Stakeholder Manager at Atkins Réalis. I don't know if you want to say anything about who you are and where you've come from, Holger, but I will now hand over to you. So thank you very much.
That's great, Emma and Sue and everybody for having me back again in one of my favorite events of the year. We all love trees, and the view behind me is the view in front of me out of my window. Trees need space. They need to coexist. I am at Atkins Réalis. I've previously been a geologist and a geographer trying to understand soil and ground conditions. I then had 5 years in central government working on the utility side, building a national map of pipes and cables, which is how we sort of got connected to each other. And yeah, we have three really, really exciting talks. I had the privilege of having a look at them all and a chat before. And we're going to be keeping to time. As Emma said, please put comments and questions in the chat. That will be moderated throughout. We're recording, and we'll also be capturing anything that's left over in the chat after, and we hopefully have a good 30 minutes at the end for open questions. And yeah, we're going to run this as a collaborative and a trusted forum, so be respectful and mindful of others, and yeah, camera on or off is an option. So first of all, we have Sarah Dodd, who is a director and is specializing in tree law, which I think is just absolutely fantastic. I can't wait to see this presentation and being given in person. So over to Sarah from Tree Law to tell us about who owns the subsurface and who owns the roots and the pipes and everything we're in. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks very much, Holger, and hi everybody, and welcome to the session. I'm pleased to be launching the session with a legal part, just to ease you all in gently. So let me just share my screen so I can share my slides. Can someone give me a thumbs up or let me know that you're able to see the slides? All good, excellent, brilliant. Right, so today's session is a legal rights to the subsurface. But before I get going with that, I just want to tell you a little bit about Tree Law. So I am the CEO and founding owner of Tree Law. And actually, our newly formed mission statement fits absolutely perfectly into this topic. So Tree Law bring expertise and fresh thinking where trees, people and property meet. And that's exactly what we're talking about here, where trees, people and property meet, but in an underground capacity. So starting with some basics, let's have a quick think about what tree roots need. So tree roots growing underground need a few things in order for the tree to be able to survive and grow. Those are oxygen, water, soluble nutrients, space, and suitable soil conditions. So roots will seek these things out in order for the tree to survive and thrive. But can we predict the behaviour of tree roots? I see lots of models that try and predict whether trees are likely to cause damage in certain areas or likely to cause issues. And there's always a caveat, because it's difficult to predict exactly what's going to happen underground. So no, we can't predict the behaviour of tree roots with precision, but we can predict the likely pattern of root distribution and behaviour if we know the soil conditions. So a couple of points to think of here is roots grow where conditions are best. They're hugely opportunistic. So if there's a soil with consistent moisture content, if there is an oxygenated soil, and if there are available soluble nutrients, that's where the roots are going to go. Most roots are shallow and radial, with up to 90% of them in the top 600 millimetres of soil depth. The soil type itself can influence how roots behave. So if you've got clay soils, you're going to have roots probably found more shallow and spread more laterally. If you've got sandy, free draining soils, the roots are going to be able to penetrate deeper. And if you've got compacted soils, that can lead to deflection or restriction, because roots are looking for those areas where the soil is less compacted, so where there's likely to be more air pockets and therefore the oxygen, soluble nutrients, etc. Barriers or structures can redirect roots. As I said, roots are opportunistic. And the barriers and structures that we're thinking of in this sort of scenario are cables, cable induct, pipes, things like that. So what's the problem here? Why are we talking? Why is there a legal element to this? But there's a bit of a clash. So we've got what's going on above ground legally, and we've got what's going on below ground. So above ground, we've got issues of land ownership. We've got boundaries, property boundaries, and we've got legal rights. You might have a right of way, a footpath, for example. Underground, we've got a limited area where you've got competition from roots with other things, such as pipes and cables. And then we've got soil, water, air, and let's not forget, nutrients, microbes, fungus, all that sort of stuff that keeps the soil itself healthy and thriving. But this isn't a simple conflict. What I'm trying to show here is we're dealing with a squashed system with a limited amount of space. So there are multiple competing uses of this same subspace. So in this squashed area, we've got utilities, potentially drainage, we've got foundations from properties, perhaps energy infrastructure, and all in the same area where tree roots are trying to live and thrive. This creates a very contested environment. This subsurface area is a contested and full environment. But we can say that visibility in this space is improving with the newly launched or relatively new National Underground Asset Register, which provides a map and is coordinating the location of these underground assets. And this is a problem which you can really think of as a 3D or a 2D problem. Now, I'm often told that lawyers are black and white, thinking either black or white, and not really in multi-dimensions. So law can be quite two-dimensional, but this is definitely a 3D problem, even a 4D problem, which I'll get to at the end. So the law is structured around property boundaries, property ownership, what's registered at the land registry, who's got a right of way, has an easement being granted, etc., etc. I can reel off an awful lot of property legalities, I guess. But underground, the subsurface is layered. It's layered, it's shared, it's interactive, it's irreplaceable, and in some parts it's unknown. And actually, I popped in that word irreplaceable because I thought that was incredibly important. I often deal with areas involving, say, for example, ancient woodland, where you're looking at not only the trees, but at the soil in the underground as part of the holistic view of the ecosystem. And those soils are part and parcel of the ecosystem. And once they're damaged or disrupted, that's gone, and that's gone forever. So that's why I wanted to put that irreplaceable word in. So first question really that I'm posing to think of as we go into the rest of the sessions is the current law suitable for dynamically managing this 3D system? And actually, should we add in a fourth dimension? And then in thinking about that fourth dimension, I'm thinking of time. And time goes hand in hand with what I was saying just then about some aspects of soil being irreplaceable. So you not only have the depth, breadth, etc., to create that 3D view, but you've got that fourth dimension of what's going to happen over a period of time. So what is the subsurface and who has the rights? The picture there is meant to show a property in someone's ownership and they own up to the sky and down to, I guess, down to the core of the earth. But the subsurface is the underground environment beneath land, including soil, roots, water, and buried structures, together with the legal rights associated with that space. So the starting point in law is actually that the landowner owns up to the sky and down to the depths. And there's some funky Latin maxim which sets that out. But is that actually true? So ownership only extends as far as is reasonably necessary for the use and enjoyment of land. And any lawyers out there will have heard the word reasonably put into so many areas of law. So deep subsurface rights are often separately owned or reserved, such as mining rights. And statutory undertakers, so your water providers, electricity, gas, etc., they all have rights to install their apparatus under the same underground. So ownership isn't actually the simple answer. So the starting point is landowners control what's reasonably necessary. However, the deeper down you go, deep rights may be separate. Statutory undertakers, so the electricity, gas, etc., have access rights. Multiple parties can occupy the same space. You might have a landowner's tree, you might have a telecoms cable, you might have a gas pipe, all in the same space. So the ownership of land doesn't resolve this legal conflict, and actually it can shine a light on a legal conflict. So the area where roots are most likely to be present, as I think I've said already, is roots tend to like to be in the top 600 millimeters or so of soil. Again, depending on what sort of soil type it is. So what do we find in the top 600 millimeters of soil? So the surface to shallow subsurface. So here we've got the topsoil, we've got fine fibrous roots, we've got high oxygen levels, which is why the fine fibrous roots are there. And we've got utility surfaces often just below. And obviously if a utility provider is doing some installation or maintenance of their services and they're digging through this topsoil to get down to where they need to be. So who owns or controls this area? Well, here it's really the shallow depths that are in accordance with the land ownership. So you're going to have the landowners, the owner of the property or the owner of the plot of land, who is going to have those land ownership rights over this sort of shallow depth of soil. So they're going to have the strongest control. And as a lawyer, I'm thinking about what sort of legal issues do I see involving this sort of area of this topsoil. And I'm thinking of nuisance and negligence claims. I'm thinking of root encroachment. I'm also thinking about issues involving like British standards, so BS 5837, building near trees, etc. So these are the sorts of owner versus owner dispute that you might have involving areas of the shallow subsurface. So when we get lower down, then you get into see the installation of the apparatus by the statutory providers. So here we're getting into the artificial subsurface, and I've put a depth here of 250 millimeters plus, because all these utilities aren't installed in the same location. You've got stuff that will be installed in quite a shallow location, we're talking water and gas, and then you've got other stuff, drains and sewers are going to be far, far deeper. And then in amongst all of this as well, let's not forget, you may have trees, you may also have properties. Properties are hopefully built on some sort of foundation. And I know as a lawyer dealing with failed foundations on a regular basis that those foundations could be 200 millimeters deep, or they could be 2000 millimeters deep. So we're really dealing with a variety of depth there. So when you're getting further down, so below the sort of 600 millimeters, who owns or controls this space? So the landowner's still going to be involved in ownership as the owner of the land, but you're getting into the zone where you've got these statutory providers who can exercise their statutory rights. You've got your statutory undertakers who can exercise their statutory rights to install and maintain their apparatus underground. And there's not many, I mean, there's statutes which give them the power, but in terms of how they exercise that power, that's very much set out in guidance. And guidance is the sort of thing that makes a lawyer sort of flinch a little bit, because what guidance says is it's not necessarily legally binding, it's sort of a best practice approach. But we've got some solid guidance here in the newly released volume 4 of the Streetworks UK guidance, previously known as NJUG. So don't forget here, you've got 90% of the tree roots that also want to live in the top 600 millimetres as land. So you're really starting to see that conflict. So who takes priority? Because the law here doesn't rank all these people in terms of priority, basically. So you've got trees, utilities, drainage, infrastructure. They're all operating under different legal regimes. They're operating under different statutes. They've got competing rights, and even with the improved and increased visibility that the NUAR gives, the law doesn't rank those competing users. So a tree owner doesn't trump a utility provider and vice versa. So it's really creating a system where there is visibility, but still a clash in terms of the law. So I would say it's created a fragmented system. So rather than a system that works like a well-oiled cog, you've got a fragmented cog here with the landowner, utility provider, local authority, and tree owner often coming into conflict. There's no single coordinating framework, no duty to optimize outcomes. The law regulates the participants, but not the system as a whole. So this is just a list of the statutory powers and where you might find them. So you've got the Highways Authority and the Highways Act, New Roads and Streetworks Act for the electricity providers, etc., etc. And then at the bottom, I've got a little list of other ways in which you can legally give someone access to the underground, so an easement or a way leave or even a prescriptive easement, which is one of those long user rights. I'm just going to skip past that because that's actually just saying what the Streetworks guidance is. So I thought I would touch upon an example, and this is an example which flags up where there may be a potential conflict in a tree that's protected and a statutory undertaker trying to exercise their rights. So what I'm trying to show here with a tree is that if you've got a protected tree, whether that's protected by a tree preservation order or a conservation area, all parts of it are protected. So not just the overground stuff, it's the underground roots that are just as protected as well. So here you've got the electricity board that have arrived in their van, they've put up their notice, they're going to start doing some works on their cables. So statutory providers can, in this situation, potentially rely on an exemption. So tree preservation orders mean that you have to make an application to a planning authority for permission to do works to a protected tree. However, a statutory undertaker has the ability to exercise their power and rely on the exemption, meaning that they can go ahead and do that work without permission. But that is not a get out of jail free card, and I tried to find a get out of jail free card picture, because they have to make sure that in order to exercise that exemption, they rely on certain grounds. So they need to show that it was necessary to carry out their statutory functions, it was urgent or required to maintain and operate their infrastructure safely, it must be strictly necessary, proportionate, and properly executed. So actually, in a scenario where there is a statutory undertaker carrying out work close to a protected tree, they do still need to be bearing in mind those protections and having the relevant communication with the planning authority if perhaps any of those points cannot be satisfied. So statutory powers, as I said, are powers, they're not absolute. The undertaker has to show that the works are necessary, proportionate and properly executed. So again, the lawyer in me likes to refer to a duty of care. So they have a duty to take reasonable steps to avoid damage, and they must follow best practice, such as using available data sources, following guidance, and consulting. So this is a constrained license, not a free right. So thinking about the future, I wonder where the law is heading. The current position, as I've touched on, is that there are fragmented rights, reactive disputes, and limited coordination. There's emerging pressure here because there's increased demand on the subsurface, obviously as we grow and build more. There's greater congestion and more and longer term impacts, or certainly more awareness about long-term impacts. And it's all in a space, so there's no integrated legal framework. So would you agree that the subsurface is the most legally underdeveloped space in land law? Are we building a digital infrastructure to coordinate faster than the law is changing to govern the subsurface? So I'll leave you with those final points to mull over. I would invite you to scan the QR code, check out our website, drop me an email if you'd like to. As I say, Tree Law, we deliver expertise and fresh thinking in exactly this space where trees, people and property meet. Thank you very much.
Superb, Sarah, and fantastically kept to time. The chat is filling up, and I am just going to, first of all, answer your question directly. I absolutely think regulation and legal systems are lagging behind what is possible or even necessary in the United Kingdom. I put in the chat because we've got such an international audience, which I wasn't really aware of. This is obviously highly relevant for a particular jurisdiction at a time. So what you're hearing here might not apply in Israel or in Quebec or in wherever you're all from. So we have a few minutes because you've kept to time so well for maybe a couple of thoughts you want to take from the chat, or maybe if Sue or some of the moderators have picked up a particular couple of things, we can just have a quick.
There were two that I brought up. One was my own question. And when it comes to the exemptions and everything has to be done correctly, does the statutory undertaker have to pay for tree officer or some sort of supervision time to make sure it's carried out correctly, or are we just at the mercy of them actually doing what they should do?
I've looked at this, Sue, and it definitely says, and I can't point to it directly because it could be scattered across lots of different places, but the statutory undertakers, before they rely on that exemption, and if they're digging in and around protected trees, that they should consult with the planning authority to give the planning authority an opportunity to come out to site, to be there to sort of govern best practice. The cynic in me says that I know lots of scenarios where that hasn't happened. I don't know whether it would be standard practice for a statutory provider to do a check to see if there was any protection in place in relation to trees that they were digging nearby. So it does exist there, Sue, but I have a question mark as to how much that coordination have, especially with some, statutory providers are often exercising their rights on an urgent basis. If there's been a power cut or something that's in the middle of the night and they need to go out there and make good straight away, then obviously being able to contact a tree officer and get them out to site at that time might simply not be possible. So it's again a clash with how the two of them operate.
The other one, it's absolutely close to my heart. David Brassfield, are you there, and would you like to turn on your camera, because he's raised the thought which I think is really important about trees having rights.
Okay, that was all of a sudden. I think you might see me. Okay, first of all, thank you. That was very interesting. I'm not a lawyer and really need the kind of information you provided for us. But we've been hearing a lot about elements of nature being granted legal personhood lately, and you didn't say much about that. So I want to make trouble for you and see if you can mix that into your overview of rights and make sense of it for us. Thank you.
That's a really interesting topic, David, and it's something that I have discussed with various people over the last year or so, giving trees legal standing, as we call it. I like the sessions where I can totally leave my formal legal thinking behind and really deep dive into the creative element of how we could do that. But when I think as a lawyer, I'm still struggling to see how that can happen. Hopefully there are going to be people cleverer than I am that can make that happen. And if and when that does happen, then absolutely they are going to be, in there with their own legal rights, because you've got some trees, they're going to outlast the property owner, the property, and any of the utilities beneath them, if they're looked after. So that's a great point. Thank you for making it.
Thank you. We still do have a little bit of time, and I'm just going to pick up the question from Paula that just came in right at the end there. How can we reserve space for trees? I think that's a very interesting question of sort of safeguarding of space below ground. And I just know from the London situation that we only really safeguard subsurface space for major future infrastructure programs, like say a new tunneling project. I like that idea. I don't think we do that, but yeah, that's a really interesting question.
Do we do it with tree pits at all? I mean, I don't know much about them, but I know that there's technology in planting trees in the urban environment in certain different ways, and whether that is helpful at all, I don't know.
Yeah.
Isn't it to do with the integrated? I mean, Kat will probably touch on it, but the integration between utility companies and people trying to plant trees. Isn't this the holy grail that we'd all like to get? That if only everybody talked to each other, we might be more successful.
Absolutely.
You will, and we've still got people entering the room. Very good. Invite. Right. Yeah, you'll be busy in the chat. I'm going to dive into the chat as well once we move in. If anybody has a final question they would like to ask with their camera on, potentially, happy to give a couple more minutes. And then we might move on, but I just
Holger, we've got John Lamb with a question.
Yep, sorry, go.
Okay.
Hi, Holger. Good to see you. So if works have been undertaken that impact a third-party tree route, where does that liability or where does that responsibility sit? Whether the actual tree is not in your demise, it could be a highway tree, but actually someone's undertaking work on their property. So Sarah, I just wanted to understand the sort of specifically the legal rights of the roots, I guess, as opposed to the tree in its generic sense. Thank you.
So what are you thinking of there, John? Are you thinking of a scenario where, say, there's a tree in a garden and then the roots encroach over the boundary into, say, I don't know, underneath a road?
Yeah, the roadworks could impact that private tree, or vice versa. The tree could be a highway tree, and the neighbour, the actual private property, damages those roots. How far out? I think there was an earlier comment about the roots will match the size of the crown, or the reach of the crown often. So how do we ensure that we are cognizant of the roots?
And you've introduced there an interesting point, which is a property boundary. So it's a boundary on top of the land, which underground doesn't, well, it does exist, but the roots don't adhere to a property boundary. So there you've got roots encroaching from one person's land into another. And actually thinking about that, the encroachment of the roots themselves is what can be classed as a legal nuisance. I'm sort of thinking aloud now. This is my thought process. So actually the person on the other side of the boundary, so not the tree owner, the starting point is they would have a common law right to remove roots back to the boundary line, but that common law right has got the limit of it can only be exercised if that's done reasonably and it doesn't affect the health of the tree. So the roots underground are just as much the property of the tree owner as the branches and the main structure of the tree. So I think it's never going to be one answer, but a starting point would be that if any works are done in proximity of a tree roots which could affect the health of the tree, they must be exercised reasonably to minimise that risk. It's going to be quite nuanced and dependent on quite a lot of things, John, but I think that's my starting point in terms of an answer.
Great. I'm just delighted that we have legal expertise going into this space in general. And that means to me, looking back over the last sort of 10 years in this space, we would have not had legal expertise, and you don't seems like you're not the only one on the call in this space. So that's a really good sign. And I think we might come back to this in the Q&A later, but I think highways authorities, local authorities, clearly are at the front line here, and getting advice into those spaces is really important. Super. Thanks, Sarah. So we are now at 3 minutes before time. So again, we're saving up discussion time for later. We're now going to move across to Andrew, who's director at Urban Plant Lab and a senior lecturer at the University Centre of Myerscough, who will talk about tree roots and how much we know, what we know about their behaviour. So we're all interested of how do they seek out the space, the nutrition, the spaces, which sort of leads on from what space, who owns the space, and what is the space. And now we're going to hear from Andrew about how trees occupy those spaces. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you. Can you see my slides?
Yep.
Okay, Holger.
All good.
Great. Well, I've got absolutely no legal expertise whatsoever, but I have been spending a lot of time thinking about trees, and it's a great pleasure to share some of those insights that I've gained on tree roots. As we've already seen, actually, the needs of a tree are rather simple. Above ground, we have carbon via CO2 and oxygen, of course, to drive respiration and photosynthesis, light, providing the engine for that process. And of course, trees require space. And below ground, we have a whole range of macro and micronutrients. And really the only difference between those is the volume in which they're required. So micronutrients are just required in much lower quantities than the macronutrients, but all are essential to the tree in some way. And of course, the other thing that the soil provides is water, oxygen for aeration, and of course, biology as well. And one of the things that I think is really helpful to think about is that tree roots should, they don't always, of course, but they should grow in a soil system. And by that, I mean, you've got the chemical elements of the soil, you have the physical elements in terms of the texture, the level of compaction perhaps, but then critically, you've got the biological elements, and a soil system should have all of those components that complement and interact with each other. And only when that's working effectively do you get good nutrition and good fertility out of the soil. So often in urban environments, I think you find that biological element is really suppressed, and then you don't really have a system working as it should do. So that's a key sort of thing to be thinking about, really. Just going back to one of the other TDAG documents that I've been involved with, of course, it's the rooting environment that is one of those fundamental pillars of tree establishment. And I won't look at all of them, but within the rooting environment, we have to be very intentional about the design of that and design rooting environments into schemes, because I think it's already been mentioned in the chat, it's rather difficult to retrofit a good quality rooting environment into urban space when you've got competing utilities and so on. The volume of soil that is required is really important, but it's not just about volume, it's also about the quality of the soil that's actually within that volume. So you can have a large volume of sand that delivers less than the smaller volume of very good quality soil that's biologically rich and acting as a soil system should. So, these things are somewhat interdependent, and part of what's driving that, of course, is the ecology of the soil. And so those elements really support the rooting environment. Just to give you an idea around soil volumes, they vary quite widely, but the best practice going on in cities such as Malmö in Sweden, which is the sort of real leader in the design of rooting environments, along with their colleagues in Stockholm, they're sort of recommending as a default 30 cubic meters per tree. And of course, that's a very large volume compared to what we might be used to. And of course, that's a starting point often gets reduced. But to get, like effectively, trees do need quite large volumes of soil to really deliver from an establishment ecosystem service point of view, and general performance. Well, what do we know and what do we not know about tree roots? That was kind of my brief. Of course, it's easier to focus on what we know rather than what we don't know. But in any case, I'm going to try and talk to you a little bit about some of the fundamentals of tree root development, and in a rather constrained amount of time, just try and articulate some of the key aspects of root development. And so, of course, we have some historical literature there. I just chose some nice images from one of a classic German text on the subject. One of the challenges, though, of course, about looking at roots, studying roots, understanding what they're doing, is that we don't often get to see them. And this is an image of a tree. Unfortunately, I don't know the species, but it was on the banks of the Mekong Delta, where you can see the erosion around the tree roots that has really nicely exposed the extensiveness and the complexity of that tree root system. And so just because much of this is below ground, we shouldn't be kind of lulled into a sort of sense that it's not there. It absolutely is there. Much of this would be buried in many circumstances, but you can see a real labyrinth of tree roots in that particular volume of soil. Closer to home, this is in Lancashire. This is an oak tree where, again, the riverbank has been eroded, and we get to see the exposed tree roots that are holding onto the riverbank and really are rather extensive within that particular environment. So the functions then of roots, we often think about uptake of water and nutrients, but of course they also act, particularly those larger woody roots, act as conduits for transport. And it's important that they are woody and are suberized, because what you don't want to happen is water to leak out of the root system before it's made it into the tree. So the woody roots are actually really not very good for uptake, but they are effective at conducting materials from the fine roots into the stem and then, of course, up into the crown of the tree. We often in arboriculture think about the mechanical supportive role of root systems, and obviously there's interactions with particular decay fungi that limit that process. But that's one of the fundamental characteristics of root systems, and that is the anchorage, the mechanical support, but also the storage of particularly carbohydrates. From a tree's point of view, the safest part of the tree, if you like, the bit that's least likely to be mechanically wounded in a storm and mechanically fail, is the root system. And so actually storing carbohydrates in roots is a really good, safe place to do that. And you often see when trees are decapitated, either through a storm event or indeed via a chainsaw, you see the result of that storage in the new shoots that emerge from that particular cut stem or cut stump. And that is initially at least being funded by those stored materials within the root system. So storage provides a really important aspect of the root system, but they also help to regulate plant growth, provide a habitat for microorganisms. We think particularly about things like mycorrhizal fungi that act in symbiosis to help absorb nutrients, and particularly some of those hard to get nutrients like phosphorus that mycorrhizae are particularly important for. And then the other thing that roots do is they produce a lot of exudates and chemicals that are capable of modifying the soil environment, and particularly the sort of exudates that are rich in carbons, carbon compounds that really nourish the microbiology of the soil, absolutely critical for that healthy soil system that I was talking about earlier. Well, in terms of development, then we have a radicle, which is the first root that emerges from the seed at germination. Germination can take a number of different forms, but effectively what you get is the radicle with a root apical meristem at its apex that is responsible for the primary elongation of that root system. And that root apical meristem is protected by a root cap. And then as that extends, we have a maturation zone behind that then ultimately provides lateral root development from something known as the pericycle. And what that looks like in practice might be something like this. This is a walnut, a young walnut root system. And you can see that dominant taproot that's come down from that radicle, and then lateral roots that are coming out in a spiral sequence, so that a wide and a kind of full circumference of roots can be exploit the soil around that particular sapling. Tree root systems then develop from that point on, and what we end up with is a woody framework of structural roots in those trees that had their roots exposed on the riverbanks. A good example of that, a woody framework. That woody framework hosts a whole range and a plethora of fine roots. And roots, they vary massively in size, from tens of centimeters right down to a millimeter or even less. And those larger structural roots, they're going to be lasting for decades, possibly even longer, possibly centuries. And then as we get down to the fine roots, and we normally class those fine roots as less than 2 millimeters, they are going to be probably lasting perhaps weeks, months, maybe a year at the outset, but certainly their turnover is really rather rapid, and that turnover then supports the organic matter of the soil. And these fine roots there, you can see to scale really rather small. They vary quite a lot by species, and if you really get your eye in, you can understand, and pick out which species of roots is associated with a particular tree within a certain range. I mean, things like the oaks have got very fine roots. Things like magnolias, liriodendron, they've got much fleshier roots. But ultimately, what we find is that the smaller the root, the greater the absorptive capacity, but they have a higher respiration rate, because actually nutrient uptake is an energetic process. They have higher nitrogen concentration to help drive that metabolism. And then as we get to a larger size of root, they become much more focused on transporting solutes to the crown. They have a larger lifespan, a higher component of suberin, for example, to help waterproof that conduit. In terms of developing that root system, it is quite variable, but I quite like this sort of classic description from the Harvard Forest researchers, Lyford and Wilson, and they demonstrate that actually what you happen is you get root fans developing from that radicle and that early part of the root system, and then it sort of migrates out like a very, very slow ripple, and so that expands beyond the stem and out into the host soil. And of course it happens rather slowly, but over time those fine roots spread out, and then actually what happens is we get what we call delayed reiteration of additional root fans coming in behind, as that primary set of root fans migrates quite a long way from the stem. And so that's often quite a typical mode of development. We therefore have, on the periphery, or focus on the periphery, we have an extensive labyrinth of fine roots, and then we have closer to the mature stem this zone of rapid taper where we get mostly woodier roots that are there for conducting all the materials from the fine roots up into the stem, and perhaps the occasional sort of fine root development around the base of the tree. Often that's rather good for intercepting rainfall and so on, and leach nutrients from the stems. But you get the idea. You have this zone of rapid taper towards the stem, and then this labyrinth of fine roots outside of that. And for sure, fine roots can be found 25 times the diameter away from the stem. And so just to give you a couple of examples, this is a wonderful book, Wurzelatlas, a couple of Austrian authors who did really extensive and painstaking work exposing real root systems and capturing them in these amazing illustrations. And you can see this is our field maple. This particular tree is a rather young tree, but it's got a root diameter of around 15 meters, and it's around 3 meters in depth at its maximum extent. And I mean, we heard Sarah mention earlier that a lot of roots are found in the top portion of the soil, top 500-600 millimeters. But absolutely, it's true that roots can go much, much deeper than that, as you'll see in the next few slides. I think if we take our root protection area, actually, you can quite easily see, and this is just a sort of quick mock-up I've done, you can quite easily see that we can remove an awful lot of the root system whilst being within what we might call a standard compliant system. And so this particular case, you can see most of the roots could be removed, and we would still be operating within the standard, the British standard. This is another example, a mature Fagus sylvatica, so beech tree, had a radial extent of, a root plate diameter of around 26 meters. And of course, you know, that can lead to a really pronounced loss of roots if we trench that or damage the soil that those roots are in through compaction or whatever. So I think one of the key messages to take home really is that the extent of the root system goes way beyond the margins of the crown, and we should really be working on that assumption and not just thinking that the roots are up to the drip line of the tree. I put these illustrations in really just to demonstrate a couple of different morphology types. The sort of sinker roots that come down from lateral roots, you can see those sort of more vertical roots coming down off the more horizontal lateral roots, quite prominent in a number of species here in pine and fir. But I just note also that this particular pine was in a rather sandy, deep soil, but it was found to have roots beyond 9 meters in depth. So again, that just really illustrates that given the right soil conditions, tree roots can get down way deeper than often we give them credit for. And so in general terms then, when I was putting kind of some of this knowledge together, we can think of about 4 different morphology types, but it's very difficult to map species to a morphology type because you have so many interactions with the soil. But plate roots that have a rather shallow root system that conforms to the surface morphology, sinker roots where you have a sort of lateral root system and then more vertical sinker roots coming down, as you showed you an example of that. Heart root systems where it's sort of condensed around the base of the stem, and then a taproot system. Often actually you have a taproot and a lateral root system, but where you have a dominant taproot, we can call that a taproot system. Just lastly then, I wanted to just show you the interaction between climate and soil. And this is a site in Snowdonia. It was in the summer of 2018. You might remember that was quite a warm summer. And you can see this is a sort of stand of oak trees, some of which are on this slope with clearly a very shallow soil. And you can see that although they've experienced the same climate, actually, because the trees that are dead in the middle there have got much less soil, their soil volume is much lower, they've experienced that stress event much more acutely than either of those trees on the top of that escarpment, where there's presumably a little bit more soil depth, or those trees that have access to the field below the escarpment. And so, it's important to mention that trees in very close geographical proximity to each other can be experiencing very different magnitudes of stress just based on the volume of soil they have access to. And of course, if you translate that into an urban environment, you see this sort of thing happen. This is a widely used image from Johann Osberg, but this shows the central trees that are in probably a cubic meter of soil, and they are growing much less well, much slower, much more constrained growth than the trees that share larger rooting volumes around the outside of the car park. And all of that is related to the below ground rooting environment. Well, I hope that that's been a bit of a whistle-stop tour, and apologies if it's been too quick or not detailed enough, but I wanted to try and capture some of those sort of basic processes in tree root development. But of course, trees have many functions. There's structural and fine root systems. They are opportunistic, as Sarah already mentioned, so that makes them very difficult to predict. And standard practices don't actually serve trees very well, and tree root systems can be damaged even when keeping to what we might call standard practices. And of course, we have this very strong interaction with the environment, but there's a huge amount that we don't know. So thanks, Holger. I think I can probably take questions.
You've been wonderful, and what an incredible amount of amazing drawings from the Wurzel Atlas. I absolutely love it. Yeah, thanks for this so much. And I'm really pleased that you have settled in great detail the debate in the chat about whether the subsurface root extent is 2 times, 3 times, 4 times the amount of the crown. And yeah, I suppose it, as you said so eloquently, it happens what's around it and how much space and time they've got. But beautiful pictures. And just as a quick note to everyone, of course, the point of today is not just the webinar and the exchange now. It's just nice to grow our community of expertise and be connected to each other. And we can obviously all follow up with each other. And your email is there. Perfect. So Emma, I'm just sort of looking to you whether you want to pick something out in particular, or whether someone has a question right now they'd like to ask. We have a good 5, if not 8 minutes for some interaction now.
So Meg Hannah, are you there? She had just a quite straightforward, well, I hope it's a straightforward question, Andy. Are you there, Meg? Do you want to ask it yourself?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Hey, everyone, and good to speak to you again, Andy. I'm curious about the term heart roots. I don't see this as much in the North American literature as I do see in Europe. And I'm wondering if there's a similarity between heart roots and oblique roots. Are these two different things? And just want to dive in and understand that term a little bit better. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, Meg. The problem with, I guess, different silos, academic silos, is that the terminology gets interchanged and used in different ways. Yeah, heart roots is quite used quite widely in the European literature. Does it differ from oblique roots? I think oblique roots are slightly less steep than heart roots. So heart roots would tend to be like, if you think about a taproot being one that's very going down vertically, and then moving towards the horizontal, you'd probably have heart roots and then oblique roots and then lateral roots. There is actually a diagram that I can send you after that has all of these sort of terms on it. But I mean, when you actually dig up a root system, it's sometimes very difficult to understand what sort of root is what. I mean, there's clearly tap roots are easily to see. Some schemes of nomenclature have side tap roots. As say, you have laterals with sinkers. It can get complicated. I wouldn't really worry about it. It's kind of going down away from the stem at a fairly oblique angle. Heart roots, oblique roots, I think is more or less interchangeable unless you really want to get pedantic. And I'm not sure these things are terribly well defined in any case. So sorry about that.
Thank you.
I've got so it's sort of partly my own question, but it also links to Astrid if she's there. So these soil volumes, and it's always exercises me when you talk about this 30 cubic meter soil volume. Do you mean do it now or make sure there's opportunity for trees to go, which kind of links with Astrid's point that trees don't really like being by themselves because they communicate with each other. Yeah, so should you actually be looking at either groups of trees in streets or at least connecting root systems? And that's part of the whole volume sort of growth issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely isolated tree pits are not the way forward if we want healthy trees. We want as much integration below ground as possible. Shared volumes. I mean, sometimes it's possible to create what we call breakout zones into parkland or gardens or reservations beyond the soil pit. In terms of absolute volumes, it's very difficult. In fact, anticipating this very thing, some of the sort of the general scheme of things would look at like something like this for kind of crown projection to soil volume requirements. And just to give you an idea, a 20 meter squared crown projections is about 5 meter diameter crown. So you can see that you can do fairly simple schemes such as this, which suggests that around 0.6 cubic meters of soil for each cubic meter of crown projection, for each square meter of crown projection. We can do more complicated volume estimations based on crown projection, leaf area index, evaporation ratios, and so on. When I put this table together in applied tree biology, I was thinking about, well, what is the water availability requirement for a tree, and how does that differ according to soil type? And you get between 10 and 20% of the soil volume holding water. And so, of course, depending on that, you might then calculate your soil volume according to how often it needs to be recharged from a providing water point of view. It's probably another lecture in itself. So
yeah, well, someone just said felt like they're being back in the lecture theatre with you. A quick one to conclude here. Emma and John saying, what would you recommend to younger or even older professional undergraduate and engineers to improve their working practice around trees? What's the sort of single tip you would give an engineer who's getting into this?
Prevent and ameliorate soil compaction.
Prevent and ameliorate soil compaction. Very good. Very good. Well, thank you. You're obviously staying with us. We should hopefully pick up a few more discussions. You can have a look in the chat. Lots of interest in diameters, circumferences, and volumes. So that's obviously of big interest to everyone. Right. So now, Katrina is hopefully ready. Yeah, there you are. Katrina is a civil engineer, is working at Civics, and is busy working for the Greater London Authority, the Infrastructure Coordination Service there, to help the delivery of trees and suds, so blue and green infrastructure alongside planned street works. We have a strong overlap there, Katrina, as we were saying before. I really look forward to your talk. Over to you.
Thank you, Holger. Can you see my screen, everybody?
Yep.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the introduction, Holger. Today I'm going to be talking about how trees and utilities can coexist. I'm going to be introducing the guidance called Dig Once, Green Twice, which I'll talk through, and then talk about how it supports the coordinated delivery of trees and suds near utilities. So Dig Once, Green Twice is a London-focused guidance that's aimed specifically at retrofitting green infrastructure. So that's trees, suds, and trees in suds into streets where utilities are often the main constraint. The key idea of this being that when planned street works are programmed in, we can reinstate soft features instead of hard and create the opportunity to only dig once. The guidance is being led by the GLA's Infrastructure Coordination Service, and it's being produced by Civic alongside the co-authors shown, who bring the range of expertise to the document. The GLA recognised the need for this guidance because London-based targets require 7,000 hectares of the city to be drained to suds and green features. In the year from 2023 to 2024, 2.2 million street works were carried out in the UK, with about 70% of these being planned works. So the guidance is targeting delivering trees and suds alongside these works, and it's being published next month. I'll caveat now by saying that I'm a civil engineer, not a tree specialist, but a lot of my working experience is in sustainable drainage and green infrastructure in public realm and streetscapes. I'll also caveat that my experience and the guidance are based in London, so apologies for the Southeast and UK focus. So what I'll be discussing today is the issues and the perceived issues around trees and utilities, then how they can coexist and what kind of solutions and systems make this coexistence workable. Starting with the baseline issue, as Sarah mentioned earlier, streets are very pressed for space. They need to be able to do a lot in a narrow and shallow corridor. They're being expected to accommodate a lot of functions, such as the utility routings, flood management schemes, heat mitigation, active travel, and placemaking. And all of this pressure lands in a very finite space that's already allocated and very heavily congested. Utilities are usually seen as the main blocker to tree planting in urban environments. They have inconsistent depth, materials, ownership, and maintenance needs that can affect planted assets, and they also take up a lot of the existing underground space. There's a perception that trees and utilities are incompatible, and through the research that we found on this guidance, it's not entirely unfounded, as damage can occur in both directions, and when it does, there can be a high consequence of failure. An interesting study that we found on coexistence issues between trees and utilities that was undertaken in the city of Rennes in France found that 5% of trees are affected by trench openings for utility works every single year. And of the coexistence problems experienced, 58% were in the construction phase, so whether that was planned or emergency works. 32% were damaged by utility works to routes, and 10% were damaged by routes to utilities. So it does go both ways. When considering coexistence, we're thinking about the life and longevity of both the assets, so the tree and the utilities, and not just the installation of one. Coexistence should consider how both systems can be happy together. So looking at the first of these two systems is trees and identifying what they need to succeed. I won't go into this too much because this is a call of people who know a lot more about trees than me, and it's kind of already been talked on today. But the idea is that we want to make sure that when we're considering coexistence, that we're carrying forward what good looks like for the tree, full stop. On the utility side, the success of utilities comes down to access. So these are working assets and they need to be frequently serviced, upgraded and replaced, all of which require access. In London this year, Thames Water are currently undertaking over 100 kilometres of upgrade works in the city, which is their largest upgrades package in 150 years. And a lot of this is necessitated by the fact that we have a lot of ageing infrastructure in this city. That ageing infrastructure is often what leads to the unplanned works as well. The asset type and risk profile also differs across utilities and should be considered along tree siting. So a plastic duct with fibre network in it is a very different consequence of failure than a highly pressurised or high voltage network. In the legal and regulatory context, specifically for utilities, street works sits within the New Roads and Street Work Act framework. So utility providers do have statutory right to access and maintain their assets, even when there is a tree. So when considering how trees and utilities can coexist, we should also be thinking about the long term of both of those assets in this context, because we want to avoid the failure of the tree system or creating scenarios that require utility statutory powers to be employed that then result in tree damage. So now that we have the requirements of the trees and the utilities, we can think about how we can situate them together. The first step is in the design stage, as the solution is always going to be site specific. So once you have your site selected, we're looking at undertaking our standard due diligence, like has already been mentioned today, using the desktop information or NUAR information available to verify your in-ground conditions at the site. And then also that can mean trial holes and slit trenches to get an accurate position of your site specifically and the utilities there. Different sites will lend themselves to different green solutions, and this should be deduced through site findings and then adapted into the design. When designing for trees near utilities, we want to be asking what is the planting at the site looking to achieve and how will positioning best serve the tree. So are we going to be ending up with trees looking like the middle of Andy's car park that he shared? We want to pick species that are suited to the site and that have been agreed with the adopting body as well, if they're taking on the ownership of it. And if planting is being linked to street works, and we also want to consider things like nursery availability and lead-in times with the planned street works. Coordinating early with utility owners and on offsets and acceptable protective measures is also important. Back to the legal context on this one, offsets aren't a requirement, but we're looking at how we can provide a design that balances introducing greening with the access and maintenance strategy for the utility that doesn't force damage to our tree. If trees aren't the best solution for the site, and this is the civil engineer and me talking, then sustainable drainage systems like rain gardens or swales with shrub planting can still deliver huge benefits, particularly in surface water flooding mitigation, which is a frequent issue in this city and this country. When designing for SUDs near utilities, the focus is on obviously your general SUDs design, like hydraulic performance, inlet positioning, along with your levels design. But it should also consider utility depth and to ensure that minimum covers aren't impacted by the adjusted ground levels that usually are proposed through SUDS design. The use of liners, geotextiles, and warning markers can also help keep assets protected and identified within these features. So on to some solutions for positioning of trees and utilities. This register is an excerpt of the utility offset register that is included in the Dig Once, Green Twice guidance to collate all of the London utility provider guidance requirements. They are not absolutes, they're purely a collation of conservative easements that these utility providers are happy to recommend without knowing your site or your proposals. This is what you use as a baseline, and from here you can use engineering judgment to then develop designs. The key message here is engaging with utility providers, because if they can understand your site-specific design and their asset within that site, then you can coordinate together on a solution. One of our guidance case studies is a rain garden scheme that was collaborated with SGN, who are a gas supplier in this country, and the design developed to a point where their asset now runs through the rain garden. And on another case study, we worked with telecoms provider to reduce their offset requirements on a tree in SUDS system down to just situating their ductwork outside of the system liner. So solutions through collaboration are possible. To help tackle off some common retrofit scenarios, the guidance also includes typologies of solutions for different streetscapes. So different configurations will naturally encounter different utilities. For example, in a roadway that's installed with utilities in line with Streetworks UK, or formerly NJUG, a central reservation isn't likely to encounter utilities other than possibly a deep sewer system or street lighting. Whereas a pavement, on the other hand, is likely to have the full array of utilities, and a build out onto a pavement may have no utilities at all. So it can inform tree species and planting solutions. Beyond tree positioning, there's a number of alternative familiar systems, products and measures that utility providers look for to mitigate against their primary concerns. These include things like soil cells, root deflection systems, cable protection sleeves, and streetscape configurations. In retrofitting trees, the mitigation usually sits with the green infrastructure provider. So for example, the onus would be on the installed tree and the root deflector being installed in proximity to that rather than a cable protection system, for example. Finally, looking at the delivery of trees near utilities. The construction and reinstatement require planning and sequencing and good communication with the public. Delivering green infrastructure, if that's the strategy, alongside planned utility works will very likely elongate the programme rather than just comparing to reinstating standard asphalt. So we want to be telling residents and communities about the benefits that this would bring. Down the line, if reinstatement works are required to the green infrastructure after street works, then specialist contractors may be required, and upskilling across public authority term contractors can also be considered. The image shown is the installation of Stockholm Tree Pit system in North London, where Stockholm Tree Pit's founder Ben Rose was brought on to the project to upskill the contractor on the installation requirements. Another useful tool is areas can be designated as a special engineering difficulty or an SED under Schedule 4 of the New Roads and Streetworks Act, where they contain special construction features which are such that works must be executed to avoid damage or failure of the feature. So the designation doesn't mean that utilities or highways maintenance can't take place, but it just makes sure that no works are undertaken until a plan and section of the works have been agreed between the undertaker and the relevant authority. So this helps correct reinstatement of the green infrastructure system and protects the integrity of the feature. Maintenance is where coexistence can succeed or fail, and it comes back to the fact that the design has to assume that future maintenance and access to the assets will be needed. Maintenance responsibilities should be clear and handovers properly managed, and utility safety risks should be understood by everyone. Signposting to utilities within features through surface measures can also help in future maintenance works. So the key takeaway is that trees and utilities can coexist. Every site needs a tailored response, and the lifespan and longevity of both the trees and the utilities should be considered. And finally, planned street works are a major opportunity, so collaborate with utility providers early to deliver more trees and green infrastructure across our streets. Thanks, everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. I love the positive message at the end, and we can probably go back to collaboration and coordination and some of the developments in GLA, Greater London Authority, and in Manchester in a bit. So lots has happened in the chat. If Sue or Emma want to pick up, I'm just going to start actually with Helen. Helen, do you want to come on and ask your question? What's the best way to bring utilities on the journey? Which is an interesting question. Have you interacted in your work directly with utilities? Yeah. Can you give us a little?
Hello. Yes, it was just a conversation. I'm a landscape architect. I work in a local authority. Welcome to my office. And basically talking to sort of our highways, departments or anyone who has regular interactions with the utilities companies, they bandy around these sort of rules, which are less than helpful when you want to make a city greener. And I just wanted to know whether there was any sort of advice on how to approach this sort of, quite anti, tree sort of sentiment from some utilities providers sometimes, and how we can sort of make them a bit more open to doing trees. I know there's some sort of suggestion about using tree cells and stuff, but when I get a blanket, I don't want trees within 4 meters of my utility. I find that a little bit unhelpful. So I wondered whether there's any advice.
Helen, can I just chip in and just ask you, Katrina, can you broaden it out a little bit more? Like not just utilities, but how can we get engineers more broadly to come along with this way of thinking? As an engineer yourself.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. I mean, to take it first on the utility side, when we were doing the research for the guidance and also through live projects that we have, that is generally the first stance, is like a blanket no. And then you talk more and more about their asset, your site, your species, and it almost always improves from there, like through my work experience. I've had sites where we've gone through, we've walked the entire site, we've mapped out on the streetscape where things were going to be going in, and we've done trenches in every single location and talked through specific workarounds for each individual site, even sub-site of an overall site. And yeah, I think that would be my advice, is to kind of, I think sometimes, and I say this with the with my background as an engineer, that people are coming from such different viewpoints, and utility providers are coming from such a risk-averse offset. They're coming from a background of having an asset that they've acquired or had for a number of years that's already pushing the limit, it's already aging, it's already damaged, it's already cracked, it's already struggling, and adding an unknown, which engineers tend to not like a tree root system, is can start with basically fear. So it's talking to them about taking them along on your journey. I think one of the comments that we had when we were doing the stakeholder engagement on this guidance and talking to all of the different local authorities and utility providers in the city was, someone mentioned that they've just installed a tree over a gas main before, and ultimately that is actually acceptable. There's nothing that says that you can't do that. It just means that you're creating a framework that you didn't agree with the utility provider. It's not collaborative, and it's ultimately going to mean that tree will have an issue in the future if that gas main needs accessed. So I think it's kind of a mix of everything. It's the risk profile of the asset, the consequence of the failure. It's taking each site as it comes, talking to utility providers, finding a kind of a medium ground that everyone's happy with. Hope that answers the question.
Out of interest, if anybody on the call does work for a utility, I mean, that would be interesting to know if we actually, do we have anyone from the sector, and would they like to sort of join the conversation? Great. Anyone else? So, a direct question for Katrina. If not, we're going to head for a
Yeah, so Holger, David
go
Brassfield had a question. David, do you want to ask it, or shall I just quickly say it?
I can ask that.
Good.
Again, thank you, Katrina. That was very informative. I look forward to reading the guidance as soon as that's published. What we know about a lot of technologies is that they suffer from something like institutional inertia. The way things were originally designed is just continued. And then you get this assumption that it always has to be that way going forward. And maybe that's not the case for a lot of these utilities that aren't so compatible with urban nature. So my question is just, are there any special types of innovation that you've been dreaming about or that you think would be fruitful to explore? Thank you.
I mean, nothing too groundbreaking, but this kind of everything I spoke about today is in the guise of retrofitting in kind of London with the existing infrastructure that we have. I'd say that if we're looking at new developments, we can be thinking a lot more about how we're spatially planning the streets. We can look at using service corridors to kind of keep all of our utilities in one place. You know, and actually making space for trees, like that's kind of, yeah, making space for green infrastructure is so important. Yeah, that would be my. Sorry, Sue.
No. I'm just trying to chase around these questions. So Daniel Plum, are you around, Daniel? He had a specific question. Right.
Hello,
Good. Go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, so this is not really like a retrofit design we've been talking about. It's more of a brand new design for quite a key infrastructure link. And what we're trying to do is introduce more SUDs into the highway network. Because I'm Atkins, the highway authority in this example. Basically, we've got like a load of highway drainage along the side of the road, just a swale with some pipes. But in addition to that, we want to make sure we've got plenty of trees in there. And it's just trying to make sure that the trees and the SUDs really just don't cause each other problems. So I just wanted to know if there was any solutions to that. I think what I have had recently is just they replaced the pipes with some standard piping just to help the problem. And I think someone said in the comment response is just use some like root barriers and membranes just to protect it. I just didn't know if there's any other things that you guys might have used in the past, really.
Is this a concern with the root system damaging the perforated pipe in your filtration?
Yeah, just because obviously it'll be a perfect water source for the roots to use, or they're just going to naturally go in there and potentially break it really quite quickly. So
yeah, I guess it depends how wide your swale corridor is and where you can position your tree within your swale corridor. You could also look at if it's not you're saying it's not an infiltration system, it's a conveyance system.
So it's essentially it starts off infiltration, but it's going to a carrier pipe essentially because it's poor. But the natural ground is basically clay, so it's not very good at infiltrating the water away.
Yeah, okay. I mean, you could always just line your filter drain system without a trench, without the pipe, and have the pipe at the kind of closer to your outlet. It doesn't need to run the entire length of the system. You can also just geotextile wrap your pipe as well to protect it.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, if you're designing your species based on the hydraulic performance of what you're, how much water you're putting into your system, then it shouldn't be looking too hard for that much water.
No, and in the end of the day, the tree's going to help it drain anyway because it's just going to take the water away. So I'm pretty happy with it being there, to be honest. So yeah, okay, thank you.
Well, nice to integrate some SUDs into a system.
Holger, can I ask one last question?
Yes, of course. Before we go wide.
Do you think, well, I mean, this is now looking at new developments, but it also actually applies to some retrofitting situations. Do you think we're ever seriously going to get these shared service ducts so that we know where utilities are and we can stop these arguments?
Was that to me or to Katrina?
No, it's to anybody who's got an answer to it because we keep raising them and we never get there.
Yeah, I'm pessimistic with that, I'm afraid. So unless we have some really visionary designers and developers in new development, but I think it's going to remain a dream in this country. Any thoughts from anyone with shared services ducts where they might be happening? Yeah, interesting to hear.
Holger, so I'm putting my hand up. I don't know how to put my hand up. I don't use Zoom that often. Hi, it's John Lamb again. I chair the United Kingdom Board for Adaptation, Biodiversity and Climate Resilience. Sue, sorry to disappoint you, but it's not being actively considered. I think there are just so many issues, and I think in many respects it falls to practitioners to do what they can where they can. And what a brilliant conversation it's been. There's over, I think we peaked at about 250. So I'm just kicking myself that Holger never told me that these events were happening. I blame the chair. But no, I think it's down to us really just to try and keep chipping away. We are the people that we've been waiting for, as a great American president once said.
I just feel it would be very cost effective by the time it's sort of.
Oh, Sue, I don't disagree with you, but as we all know, even getting up the A6 up to Myerscough College and beyond to Catterall, we can't even get the utilities to coordinate works on between within themselves, where you've got development taking place. 3 years of delays just getting into Myerscough College for poor Andrew and his students. No doubt it highlights the fact that they are statutory undertakers. They have got statutory powers that are equivalent to highway authorities. So it's a real struggle. But you're absolutely right. That is what we should be aspiring for. And in certain public realm schemes, maybe in town centres, we may be able to do some small scale stuff. But sadly, the reality is that we're fighting against a system that is just so pressured with a range of other issues. Sadly.
In this will be published street tree technical drawings, which Kat's also involved in. Excuse me. We're actually putting it as a recommendation. This would be the recommended way to do things. I think we have to all keep saying that, even if progress is slow.
Once you've done that, I will advocate that to the sector, to ministers, and we'll use Holger as the conduit into me.
Thank you for that additional responsibility. I was going to just, before we open up to all speakers and we go a bit wider and deeper and broader, I was just going to add a little bit of positive momentum here. So we do see. I was at a Streetworks conference organised by the Department for Transport. So again, apologies for international audience. This is very UK, if not even England, focused at this point. So the Department for Transport is rolling out or encouraging combined authorities to roll out the lane rental scheme, which is currently only used in 5 jurisdictions, started in the Transport for London, in Greater London Authority. We know Ofgem have an incentivisation scheme for utilities to collaborate, and we also are hearing similar notes from Ofwat. So those are the energy and water regulators in the UK. And we are seeing local authorities and combined authorities thinking about installing the right systems. And then so thanks, Katrina, for referencing NUAR there and the previous speakers. We do have increasingly good digital shared information about the street and subsurface space. So you mentioned the special engineering, the special engineering difficulties. That's the Street Gazetteer. We have unique street reference numbers. We have Street Manager, which gives us information about the previous works. We have soil conditions. We have the geological survey. We have increasingly good information about the subsurface space, which is the start to make combined and more collaborative and coordinated decisions. Because if we go back 10, 15 years, well, everybody just sort of did their own stuff, but no one knew where everything is. As we are seeing digitalization of the sector, we can also see the beginnings of Highways Authority thinking, well, we now know all this stuff. Digging here takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. There's a lot of pipes and cables here. Maybe we should designate some, and I'm not making policy here, I'm just sort of reading the room, designate some zones in the city centres where coordinated action has to be enforced or will be enforced. That doesn't immediately lead to shared ducts, but at least it means shared working and shared planning. And I'm back at Hawke, which is the Highways Authority's Utilities Committee in Manchester tomorrow, talking to the streetworks and utility sector with those ideas. So I can see some positive trends based on the fact that we have increasingly good information about what's beneath the streets. And yeah, go.
I was going to say, do you think that utilities companies have too much sort of influence?
Over who in general?
No, I remember doing a really interesting scheme in the City of London, and it was the Eastern Cluster, so the whole issue was all these tower blocks, the public realm, and so on and so forth. And there was the cheese grater and the this and the that, all going up, massive buildings. And in the city, the people supplying the services were besides themselves as to how they were going to do that. And they had proposed a shared utility duct all the way down St. Mary Axe. So that seemed great, except the relatively small price of that versus the cost of the buildings just seemed too much for anyone to bear. So it didn't go ahead. But they also pointed out that even if you had it, you couldn't make the utility companies use it. And you think, why? There's something really not quite right here. So it's kind of, who's wagging, where's the tail, where's the dog, where's any of it, what's going on?
I often sort of say in these situations, and we have a big room with a lot of people here, I often say we have the system that we have democratically made for ourselves. The utility companies are largely, if not apart from Scotland and Wales, in private sector ownership. The space under the highways, as we heard from the legal view, is owned and governed by a whole range of actors, and therefore we just have got the space that we have. However, in new developments, I do think we can be a lot more clever with design and co-design in new developments, in new towns. So maybe we just look to the future and make things a bit better there. But Sue, on a positive, again, I'm going to try here, so that we are talking, and when I say we, the consultants of all sorts of, in our sector, we're talking to utilities. They're not completely adverse to blue-green infrastructure and collaborating and coordination. It just needs to come with incentives and with the right tools and the right understanding of their business, that they need to supply homes with water and electricity and can't just wait for a year to replace something. If we get the right coordination, they're not intrinsically opposed to what we do. It just needs to all fit together. Right. So all the speakers, if they can be sort of present and ready to maybe dig into a few more of the questions, or if anybody feels they would like to raise their hand, that I can't actually see whether their hands are raised or not, or just switch their cameras on and have a go.
I think if people turn their camera on and raise their hands, they'll come onto the front screen.
Okay, yeah.
Can I start?
Yeah, well, I was going to, you go.
No, there've been some quite interesting things about rain gardens and costs and things. I think there's a whole area that nothing's quite clear about, which is costs and maintenance costs, and these can be argued up or down depending on what anybody wants to do or not do. And I just wondered if any, looking at the questions, a rain garden's actually inherently expensive to maintain.
I mean, if I could add in on that one, I think firstly, in starting with the upfront cost of them, in London, and I think the same in kind of United Utilities jurisdiction and other areas in the country, there's a lot of funding that you can get from diverting surface water drainage into SUDs. So you can acquire money towards the rain garden solution that you're proposing. And in terms of maintenance, it is obviously going to cost money to maintain a SUDS feature, a self-planted feature, as much as a lot of people look for that zero maintenance imaginary rain garden that doesn't exist. With some of the kind of solutions, I don't work for a public authority, but some of the solutions that we found through the guidance were wrapping up the cost of maintenance into the contract of the installation of the rain garden. So the London Borough of Newham has done that. So they package up the 3 years of maintenance into the cost and get that kind of put together. So instead of delivering, 6 rain gardens across their borough, they're delivering 3 and making sure that the maintenance package for that is included alongside it.
Yeah, thank you. And on that note, you just had a comment in the chat that nothing is zero maintenance. That's absolutely true. That is just it's just a fact.
John's got his hand up.
Yeah, I think it's just as a straight run on from that last point, to be honest. Nothing is zero maintenance, which does also include the current drainage network. So if we look at some of the challenges, some of the issues, some of the opportunities, especially where you've got combined sewer outfalls, and I'm going to put something in the chat in terms of an event that's taking place on Wednesday, 3rd of June in Walthamstow, in terms of its climate resilient streets, and it's the 3rd annual event that I've been working with. I think there's images shown by Meristem. They're one of the sponsors. There's been a lot of effort on this post London 2021 flooding, which of course hit London, gathered momentum, went over to Belgium, Germany, and killed over 200 people. That kind of event is, it's still within the same weather system as the UK. So what we're finding now is that the traditional approaches for highway engineers, just to say, right, let's push the water underground, the capacity for these big extreme events, 200 millimeters within a 4 or 5 hour period, or 20 millimeters, 25 millimeter rainfall events, of which they're becoming very, very commonplace within a 60-minute period, that will exceed most urban drainage systems. Now, obviously, a lot of highway engineers, and I'm not a highway engineer, I don't know what I used to be anymore, what I was now, I just sort of try to link people in this space. But what we need to look at is, especially in urban areas, where are those drains that actually, if you're going to push the water downstream where it hits the sewers, let's try and demain those. Let's try and describe how you can create a water storage basin at the heart of the community. If that means that you start digging up highways, losing bits of parking spaces to create something that can create naturally biodiverse habitat, a little pocket of ecology, but also help with heat island issues, well, that would be brilliant in terms of shade canopy and just an ecological aspect. But tongue in cheek, I got a conversation with, I think it was some of them Enfield, and they talked about nudging, I think, about 100,000 gully pots, and we got talking about saying, well, look, if we can demain 5 this year, 50 next year, and then look at doing 250 a year, where would we do that? Because pretty soon you're talking 5% of their network, but it could represent 50% of the most critical network, where this water doesn't need to hit at speed and at pace the combined sewer outfall. So there's some really, really strong narratives that says the existing drainage network is not zero maintenance, so we need to bring highway engineers to the table. We do need to support them with simple, low-cost solutions that may not be the best located schemes, but if you can get a toe in the water, proverbially, push that water to the surface and do something funky and fun with it, I think that the worst-case scenario is we create a really, really nice, attractive place at the heart of communities that have been devoid of trees, devoid of habitat, and we start to turn a problem into a solution, and it does both sides of the equation, heat island as well as managing the water. But I'll drop the link in there, Wednesday 3rd of June, climate resilient streets. Thank you.
Yeah, no, very good. And everything you're saying there, I can definitely tell you that in the consultancy sector, those trends are, you can hear and sense this in many places, that we are clear that our engineers have to include, the engineering solutions have to work with nature, and that's like a trend that is not just in niche parts in a coffee room, but that is right up front when we talk to our water clients in particular. I was just going to draw attention also to, I don't know whether someone is on the call, but the Greater Manchester Combined Authority also already working with United Utilities and the Environment Agency, and again, to place a little bit into what I said before, trying to coordinate works and then install SODs or blue-green infrastructure solutions at the same time as maintain and repair programs are happening. So it's all about aligning works programs. Great. We have, did I see? Yep, Sue?
Yep, there's a question here. So somebody's raised the document, the Association of British Insurers Protecting Your Home from Subsidence Damage. I just wanted to say the one thing we haven't touched on is the kind of role that insurance companies play in these legal arguments that people get caught into.
In particular, in relation to the subsurface, Sue?
Well, the subsurface, well, yeah, I mean, where the tree roots are obviously potentially impacting buildings, they say, and insurance companies sort of argue for the removal of the tree as the first instance, which may or may not be the clever thing to do. But have we got a problem with the attitudes of insurers and the risk? You know, we talked about risk with utility providers, but is there a similar risk with insurance companies that they would rather get rid of trees than actually find ways around the problem?
We like the quick answer to that is to say yes, and I think historically that was definitely an issue. We have to say that we are seeing suggestions which talk about being able to live in harmony with roots and utilities, you know, things like root barriers, etc. So they are entering the discussion, and definitely more so than in years gone by. But I agree that there are situations in which, yes, trees do unfortunately get targeted, where they're implicated in causing damage, whether that's subsidence or other, you know, other direct damage. Yeah.
With a bit of geology here, it's not a straightforward situation taking the tree out or not, and the soil conditions and how it's reacted. There's another link up in the chat. It is a sort of a site-specific topic, whether the tree is or isn't causing damage to the structure. I was just wondering if, oh, Naomi, please, you've just appeared.
Yes, hi, thanks very much.
Hi.
So this insurance issue, I'm located in Switzerland, but I have a bit of experience internationally, and the global experience with insurance providers is they absolutely do not like large canopy trees. And we have a lot of experience with them forcing property owners to remove large canopy trees, threatening them with refusing to insure the property, and very much enabling the trees are dangerous myth. If one compares the statistics of what kind of damage trees have instigated compared to statistics with vehicles and the problems that they have instigated from an insurance perspective, trees are not even on the radar. And so there's very much an issue with insurance providers and the ability to grow large canopy trees well into maturity, which we need large canopy trees because we are desperate for the benefits that those trees provide that small trees just cannot deliver. So this is a big issue.
And I suppose the risk there, or the perceived risk, is the damage from them falling, or potentially fire risk as well. I suppose.
Well, it's in the urban environment, which is my area of expertise. It's very much failure, and oftentimes what we see when you analyze, if you go to a site where a tree has actually fallen and you examine the root plate, you can see historic damage to the root plate that has impacted its structural integrity. And so one needs to establish the path here. And it always comes back to planning. And I would like to say that one of the ways around this whole engineer utility is how do you deal with the construction projects that will be implemented. And it always goes back to the planning phase and what you incorporate in terms of specifications into the contract and what you append to that contract. And the minute it's in the contract and that contract is signed, that means it's going to be incorporated into the build, like it or not.
Yeah, very good point. And in order to plan this, so back to my point earlier, in order to plan better, it's the more information we have up front about the actual conditions and density and of the subsurface, the better. Super. If there isn't anything left, I was just going to ask the speakers and maybe Sue and Emma. There's going to be a bit of a wrap up, but any of the speakers, Sarah, maybe Katrina, you've already been asked this question. What are we dreaming? What are we dreaming of? What would be the sort of the one thing or two things that would make a big difference to seeing more trees in the right places? So maybe Sarah, for a little sort of wrap up from you.
Oh, can I answer a different question?
Oh, of course you can.
So as we were speaking there, I wrote down 3 things.
Yeah, great.
First, about tree roots and drains. So I see this a lot in the sort of insurance space, that properties can be damaged when water's leaking out of underground drainage systems. And when investigations go ahead, it's found that there's tree roots in them. And the tree owner can often say the tree roots are attracted by the leaking drain. And then the drainage owner could say the drain was broken by the tree roots. So I often see that drain tree root conflict in a chicken and egg scenario. I make no conclusions there. It's just really an observation. Trees and the probability of damage, like we were talking there about, insurers being worried that trees are going to cause damage to their insured properties and the level of risk that they face. And I think it's universally accepted across the world of subsidence that no one tree is likely to cause damage to any property, even in the most prolific subsidence area, with a probability of greater than, I say 5%, but the experts in the area say it's probably well under that. So when people panic and say, I'm in a subsidence hotspot area and there's a big tree, I'm going to suffer damage, that sort of fait accompli is misplaced. And then this is a scattergun. And then third and finally, I have a colleague or someone in my network that does quite a bit of risk profiling for water authorities who are seeing increased leaks from their underground pipes due to ground movement caused by climate change. And that's absent the influence of tree roots. That's simply ground drying because we're in a hotter, drier climate. So those are my 3 points, totally unrelated, but they popped into my mind as we were chatting.
That's great. And it's not just the hotter, dry, it's the more intense wetting and drying cycles seem to have an impact on the soil movement. Yeah, lots of research going on there as well. Cool. Katrina, any final thoughts? And then Andrew.
No, I just hope that it's been a useful conversation today. It's been really interesting to hear and kind of through the work we've been doing on this guidance to work more and hear more about trees. I maybe have come into this portion of my career with a big focus on SUDs and the kind of flood risk mitigation that they can provide, but green infrastructure in general just has such a big benefit. So keep working with engineers. We promise we'll try to keep thinking about trees as well.
We need to keep reaching out across the sectors and work together more. Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't got a huge amount to add other than the fact that, clearly if we design proper spaces for trees, and that includes below ground and not just above ground, that's going to be the best way to kind of shift the dial in the longer term, because I think, we do know how to provide space for trees. We know how to grow trees, but we don't always join the dots up and get the people that are in control of designing those below ground areas engaged sufficiently early. And retrofitting things is a nightmare compared with designing them properly in the first place. So just a plea to consider, soil volumes, rooting volumes, making sure that the biologies and the soil systems are working as early as possible. And as you mentioned, Holger, collaboration, dialogue, and forums like this are a great place to get that sort of engagement with different stakeholders going. So thanks everybody for their time.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I just want to add from my point of view also, I was in a meeting the other day with a lot of Streetworks people, and I quoted some international exemplars, and I'm really grateful for international presence here. It is also helpful to look beyond England, United Kingdom, Europe, and into other parts of the world where things actually are going well, or maybe have not worked, and just keep reminding ourselves we're not just here by ourselves. Lovely. Thanks to all the speakers from me, and thanks to Emma and Sue for inviting me again to my favorite show of the year. So I don't know who's going to go first and second to finish off. Thank you.
I'll let Emma go first because you had your hand up.
I did. I wanted to say something about the role of education and also professional institutes. If we teach undergraduate engineers that this is how we design our cities for the future, then this is how they go out into professional practice. And the professional institutes determine what we teach at university because our degrees are accredited by them. So if there was more of a push, I think, to be teaching this stuff to the engineers, then we would be setting ourselves up right for the future. Also, if we can fly a spaceship round the back of the moon, why can't we plant trees in urban areas? And with that, I will hand over to Sue.
Thank you. Quite right. And more useful to plant trees in urban areas than the other side of the moon, in my view. So, Holger, thank you so much for chairing. You're one of our favourite chairs, as you will have gathered. And I'm sure this isn't the last word on this topic. And I would say that on the 23rd of September, where Sarah and I and others are talking about doing a further dive, more detailed dive into trees and the law in plain English, so that we all actually fully understand what things are. But next month in May, we're heading off to Excel for Future Build. We've got a Trees and Design Action Group stand there. Lots of members, some of whom are on this call, are going to take time on the stand. So it's actually quite, apart from whoever is attending Excel and might want to know about trees, it's also quite a useful way just to have a chance to catch up with each other. So that will be May at Excel, 12th to 14th of May, and access to the whole event is free. So in our newsletter this month, you'll see where to register for that. And for those in Scotland, I haven't seen any Scots say hello from here, but there may be, we've got quite a few people in Scotland. We've got a one-day conference in person in Stirling about putting nature at the heart of urban design and planning in Scotland. Because, of course, as we know, with law and everything else, everything is different in all 4 countries of the UK. So this is Scotland's chance to sort of explore their issues. And otherwise, I think we've pretty well covered everything, but always give us a note in the chat as to anything you would like us to cover. We've got various surveys going, which you'll see in the newsletter, because we're all forward planning for Trees, People in the Built Environment 6. When's that, 2027? God, our hairs will be completely grey by then. So lots going on and lots to respond to. So thank you everybody for coming. Thank you everybody for speaking. And we've earned another 5 minutes to get our tea a little bit earlier than we might have done. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you.